hey, I want to tell you cool stuff about a dinosaur. But the problem is there's just so many dinosaurs to choose from, so I decided, you know what if I just ask a couple of the most famous dinosaur paleontologists in the world what dinosaur I should talk about?
I'm here at the SVP with two of the most important paleontologists on the planet.
This is the guy who was the science consultant on the original Jurassic Park film, Jack Horner, who is so well known in the world of paleontology that I knew about him for years before I also found out that he did that. And I felt so dumb and cringy doing this with him. Oh my god. This is Phil Currie, known for a lot of things, including helping to describe the very first feathered dinosaurs that we found, and I asked them both to name any dinosaur.
Name any dinosaur. So, Dr. Currie?
Albertosaurus.
Perfect. And how about for you?
Okay, well hold on, let's just do Albertosaurus for now. It was a large carnivorous dinosaur between 25 and 30 feet long that was from Canada and very closely related to T-Rex. In fact, it's in a family called Tyrannosauridae. Actually first introduced to the world in less than one page near the very end of the 1905 paper that was naming Tyrannosaurus. But Albertosaurus has certainly received a lot more attention since then, and it is no surprise that it's the dinosaur Phil Currie named when I asked him for one, because Barnum Brown, the guy who discovered T-Rex over 100 years ago, also found a number of Albertosaurus fossils altogether, but he did not excavate all of them. And it was Dr. Currie in 1997 that rediscovered that fossil site and has done a lot of work on Albertosaurus since then. Currie and his team uncovered evidence of at least 9 individuals, at least 8 of which were Albertosaurus, buried together at the site. And because of the lack of plant-eating dinosaurs found there, they ruled out the possibility that it could have been a situation where there was like one dinosaur that got stuck in a bog or something, which then attracted multiple different predators individually to the site, which also got stuck. And without that scenario, it is difficult to imagine why a group of the same species would have collected together right before dying, unless they were living together sometime before that, and then any number of things could have killed them all. So Phil Currie and the Albertosaurus have been really important for the argument that some of the two-legged meat-eating dinosaurs, the theropods, lived and hunted in packs. But there have also been some really interesting arguments against that idea, and I think some of the most persuasive that I've seen come from this paper, so what do they say? Well, let's think about modern animals that do what some scientists argue the theropods did, things like wolves and African hunting dogs that work strategically together to bring down larger prey. Well, studies of these animals seem to indicate that this is not ultimately the reason why they live in social groups. There are other primary reasons for that, and then the ability to hunt larger prey is sort of like a nice byproduct. And besides, mammals are not closely related to dinosaurs at all, so are there more closely related living relatives to dinosaurs that display this kind of complex sociality? Well, not really, actually, no. Dinosaurs' closest living relatives today are birds and then crocodilians, and they do not display this particular kind of social behavior, so maybe our default hypothesis should be to also think of theropods as being mostly solitary. And don't worry, based on how large of prey a single Komodo dragon can take down on its own, the authors make a pretty compelling case that a Deinonychus, for example, which is a mid to large-sized raptor dinosaur, could take down a mid-sized Tenontosaurus on its own. So if you're worried about these dinosaurs being like less scary or dangerous or something, don't be. I mean, just look at these things. They are terrifying predators. None of the further details are going to change that. Anyway, all that being said, birds, crocs, and Komodo dragons, which are definitely less closely related to dinosaurs than the other two, but still a lot closer than mammals, do certainly interact. It's just not continuously. When it happens, it's more opportunistic and a lot less intelligently structured, I suppose. One example is birds like herons and egrets that might aggregate to hunt the same group of small animals, and each individual hunter will have more opportunities to catch a prey item because the prey is more constrained by there just being more hunters around. Or when crocodiles gather to a common food source, they still actually hunt individually, but a successful attack can draw other crocs in to gather around that kill, and sometimes large carcasses that are too difficult for a single crocodile to hold and defend from other crocodiles can be more easily dismembered and eaten if pulled apart cooperatively. In other words, in both these cases, the predators are not one big happy family that live and work together on purpose for a common goal. Basically, they tolerate each other on occasion when it happens to be at least somewhat useful for the other individuals to just be around. And almost always there is contention, anything from intimidation to skirmishes to infighting to sometimes even cannibalism in between individual predators in this temporary group. So overall, this should be painting a picture that is not very much like what wolves do or like what the raptors in Jurassic Park do. And the extensive evidence of face biting in theropods would fit with this narrative, those injuries occurring when multiple individuals are all feeding on the same carcass in a less than cooperative manner. But of course the discussion does not end there. Currie and another scientist wrote a follow-up response where they point out that one of the really strange and interesting things about the Albertosaurus site is that there does not seem to be much evidence of infighting, biting, or eating each other, and also that there is relatively few shed teeth found at the site. So all of that together seems that this is probably not a feeding site, which means maybe they were hanging out for some other reason. Ultimately, they conclude that the question is not whether or not Albertosaurus and other theropods were gregarious, but just actually how complex those social interactions were. Because we certainly have a lot of evidence that theropod dinosaurs hung out together, at least on occasion. We have bone beds with multiple individuals. We have trackways showing multiple individuals, and we have some fancy features like horns and crests that were probably used for members of the same species to signal to each other. And in this specific Albertosaurus case, there's good reason to think the animals were not forced to be together for environmental reasons, and they were also not together for breeding reasons. So probably they were there because there was a good food source nearby or something. So yes, there were probably interactions among large predatory dinosaurs of the same species. The question is just how frequently and to what level of social complexity. The authors do actually finish by pointing out that it's sometimes really difficult to understand the reasons behind these things in living animals, let alone long extinct ones. So I do not think this is a question that will be definitively settled anytime soon. But boy, it is a fascinating discussion. Anyway, I still cannot get over the fact that I got to introduce myself to Jack Horner and Phil Currie and then immediately ask them to be in a TikTok video. Oh, and don't forget to comment what dinosaur you think Jack Horner named, because we'll be talking about that one tomorrow. Last week, I got to meet the scientist who was the consultant on the original Jurassic Park movie, as well as another paleontologist who I was frankly even more excited to meet, Phil Currie. And when I asked them both to name a random dinosaur that I could talk about in a video, Horner said this.
Montanaceratops.
Thank you both very much.
Seeing as he's from Montana, I can't say I was all that surprised. Montanaceratops was a relatively small member of the group of dinosaurs that most famously includes Triceratops, the ceratopsians, and it was just over 8 feet long. The ceratopsians are often called the horned dinosaurs, although Montanaceratops did not have any nose or brow horns, but you still might see reconstructions of it that have a nose horn, so why is that? Well, simply just because the first fossils we ever found of it back in the early 1900s were originally and incorrectly interpreted as having a nose horn. But a 2010 study that was looking back at those old specimens as well as working with some recently discovered new fossils found that the ostensible nose horn was in fact a cheekbone. So instead it would have looked a little something more like this. And that re-identification helped place Montanaceratops in a subgroup within Ceratopsia that tended to contain smaller little dudes with less prominent face horns called Leptoceratopsidae, as opposed to it being more closely related to a different and more famous subgroup of Ceratopsia that had all of the big fancy ones called Ceratopsidae, because jargon. Anyway, the Leptoceratopsids are obviously less well known, but they lived right alongside the larger ceratopsids and were just as diverse. Montanaceratops specifically shared its home with ceratopsids like Pachyrhinosaurus and Regaloceratops and Anchiceratops. Oh, and also large predators like Albertosaurus, which is the dinosaur that Dr. Currie named when I asked him for one. So that's kind of cute. They decided to name a pair of dinosaurs that lived in the same time and place together because both of them have been found in the same rock formation in Alberta and Montana called the St. Mary River Formation. And look at that, I'm actually under 2 minutes. Turns out this short form content creator can create short form content. Nailed it.